Nice to see you all from this side. Been sitting at the front, haven't really noticed how full the room is. Building on a lot of what's been said this morning, I was trying to plan my talk to fit neatly, but it's quite hard when you're following people like David and David. So forgive me if I'm not quite as insightful. Tough acts to follow. But what I was trying to think about was, okay, you're going to get a lot of data, and Stefan too, a lot of enormously important and valuable but heavyweight information presented. And I think the challenge for all of us as publishers is to filter that and digest that and figure out what to actually do at the grassroots level and how to motivate our own staff within the organisation at the grassroots level to start caring about this and doing stuff about this. But also, of course, then how to motivate our authors and others in our community to do more in pursuit of impact and to have that broader interpretation of reputation that we've just been hearing about. So that's what I have tried to think about in putting my slides together. Think about some of the specific challenges that publishers face in terms of mobilising the research that we publish and the people who are involved in that. I think, again, building on the study that the Cyber Group did, one of the challenges is to know which of your authors are actively using these very many reputational networks or scholarly collaboration networks, another thing with many different names. Who is communicating around their research versus who thinks that just having got it published is enough and they can walk on from there. I know lots of publishers are attempting to quantify the proportion of their authors who are active. I know people are using surveys to do that. I know people who are trying to track the uptake of their e-prints URLs. There are ways that we can attempt to broadly approximate a number for which proportion of our users are doing this. Maybe 20% is the number I hear quite a lot. But then it's also difficult to then figure out, well, who are they? You can't necessarily join the dots between knowing that a proportion of your authors are active with actually who are they, which authors is it, which aren't. And of course then even for those, when you can identify the authors who are actively trying to increase the reach and impact of their work and using all these different networks, it's hard to know which ones they're on. And I've been set up very nicely there with 50 or 25 different platforms that are really gaining traction already. And that's only looking at the sort of scholarly reputational ones. Obviously, there's this wider world of other communications channels that researchers are active on in different extents in different communities. And even if you can figure out who they are and where they are, it's still difficult to track what they're doing there. I know publisher marketing departments who are trying to work with the editorial teams to know which authors are on Twitter so that then they can find them on Twitter and follow them on Twitter. But then you've got to filter through all the crap they post on Twitter and just to find the odd nugget of when they're actually talking about their work rather than their weekend or their breakfast or their pets. So it can be a time-consuming challenge. It's not impossible, but it's time-consuming to find them on those open sites. We also know, of course, that not everybody is doing this in open social platforms. Lots of people still communicate quite happily about their work via email. And how do we have any insight into that as a publisher? How do you know when somebody has sent an email to all of their colleagues? It's great if you get the results of that because they've sent out one of your ePrint URLs, but you don't necessarily know when email has been a factor in it. So it's very difficult to give guidance to people, and authors will ask for guidance. Where should I be talking about my work? You want me to try and increase its impact. What should I do? Well, we need to be able to put more data around that to answer those questions. And just finally on that point, of course, it's also very difficult to be able to gain any visibility of the sharing that they do in the dark platforms. I think Matt touched on that yes, people might be doing a great job of sharing their work in ResearchGate or academia.edu, but that's not necessarily within the terms of your licensing, and they're unlikely to welcome you as a contact on those systems, if indeed you can register for them, because you need an academic email address even to get that far. So it's very difficult, in short, to know where people are communicating, even if you can work out that they are. And the next dot that is difficult to join, it's not coincidence that I've done this as dots, is just that even if you do have a sense of where they are communicating and when they are communicating, again, there's a lot of manual effort involved in being able to map that to, and this is the effect their efforts have had on publication metrics. And there's a whole spectrum of metrics, starting with, if they've shared a link on Twitter, then you want to know how many times that tweet has been viewed or retweeted or clicked on. But somewhere you also want to be able to join that up with, and how many people then actually downloaded or bookmarked this work or cited the work. And it's very difficult to join those two things together. They're happening in separate silos. And yet we know that all of those activities are driving growth in the sort of meaningful publication metrics. And there's lots of emerging data, I use that word with a bit of a wince, around this. You may have seen Phil Davis's posting on the Scholarly Kitchen 6 weeks ago or something like that, where academia.edu had posted a press release saying that when people shared their PDFs on that website, I think they said there was an 80% increase in citations for that content, and Phil ripped it to shreds, as Phil is wont to do. But certainly there are studies that are emerging in this area. I know Tony's here from Emerald somewhere, and they did analysis of when their authors were using Kudos, our platform, and were discovering that usage of articles for which authors had used Kudos was triple what they'd expected for other articles. Our own analysis suggests that across the board there's certainly an uplift of in the order of 50% maybe when people use tools. So early days, but the stats are starting to come together, and people who are rigorous are starting to analyse them. It's evident that when authors do put some effort into using their networks to explain, to share their work, that does have an impact on the metrics that we care about at the sharp end, the academic impact metrics, as well as that broader social impact. So coming back to that group at the bottom, the people who've not been active, it is worth trying to get them to do more. It is worth trying to motivate authors, because we know it will have a positive impact for them as well as for for publishers and institutions and everybody else in this community. So that brings me to the nub of my talk, which is what can you do to motivate authors to try and get them to be more active. And this was where we started with Kudos 3 years ago. We were trying to think about all sorts of aspects of why people do and don't share their work, and what drives researchers to care about this kind of thing. We did a survey right at the start where we had 4,000 researchers respond, and we asked them lots of questions about whether there was room for improvement in terms of the reach and the impact of their work, and who should be responsible for that. And 85% said, yes, more should be done to increase the reach and impact of my work. 75% said they themselves should be doing it. That was probably the biggest surprise to us, was that actually people are willing to do this. And so we asked them why they're not. And these were, broadly speaking, the two most common answers: people saying, I don't have time to do this, or I don't know how to do this. And when you talk more to people who say, I don't have time to do this, it becomes apparent that what they really mean is, I don't see the value. Anybody can make time for anything if they think it's worth doing. So I don't hear the words, I don't have time now. I hear the words, I don't get why I should bother. And that's really what we had very clearly in our mind then at the beginning of Kudos, that to help to motivate authors to do more in this area, we have to make it really easy for them. We have to give them a standard way of doing things, work that they can just use across all their publications. They don't want to do different things in all the different places they publish, and they don't want to have to figure out too much for themselves. They want really clear guidance about which platforms should they use to explain their work and things like that. But they also really need to see the value. So that was the sort of light bulb moment that went off for us a couple of years ago. This is really what it had to boil down to, that we had to make an easy and standard process for them, and we had to make sure that at the end of that process they got some really evident reward. I realised that I should probably backtrack and just explain who we are and what we're doing. Not everybody will be familiar with us. So we're a web-based toolkit for researchers to explain their work and share it with wider audiences. And we bring in a range of metrics to show them the effect of doing this. And we provide back-end reporting to publishers too about what your authors are doing with this service and what effect it's having on readership of your publications. So the first step is explaining. We invite people to just add a plain language explanation of their work. We ask them two basic questions: what is it about and why is it important? And that's quite deliberately phrased in plain language so that we're kind of eating our own dog food on that. Many of the people, certainly when we started talking about this service, many of the people we talked to, particularly editors perhaps, were sceptical of authors' ability to explain their work in plain language. But that has not been borne out in practice for us. It's very much our experience that people can really do this, and I think it is partly the context. We're not their institution, we're not even their publisher. We're in a different zone. They've come to us with a very clear mission of broadening readership and impact, and we ask them those two very simple plain language questions. So all of that together seems to enable people to get out of the zone of academic language and do a good job of explaining their work. One of the authors that we worked with quite early on said that when she's trying to shake off her academic mindset and think about how to explain her work, she imagines that she's getting an MBE. And the Queen says, "And what do you do?" And she's got 1 minute to summarise her research to the Queen, which I've used a lot as an example of how to really think differently about how you talk about your work. And here's an example of how somebody has used Kudos to explain their work. So on the left, the formal language of publication, it's longer, it's denser. We can all have a go at reading it, and we could certainly get through the words, but we might not have a strong sense very quickly of what we're actually reading. On the right, the plain language version, much easier, I think, for both us and indeed the Queen to understand. And I think there are two key advantages, really, of these plain language explanations. One is that for people in the field, it helps you to overcome information overload. So if you're trying to wade through all of the literature being published in your field, which some researchers, I'm assured, do still try to do, it's harder and harder to get your work as an author. It's harder and harder to get your work to cut through when people are trying to read that much of the literature, and it takes a long time. And as I think David said right at the beginning, the amount of time we have for reading has remained static while everything else around it has exploded. So anything you can do to help people with that process, I think, is important. And I think even for specialists in the field, this short and concise version on the right-hand side is a useful stage in your process. You can skim and scan through a lot more of the literature if you're just reading that level first, and then from that you're determining where do you want to read the next level down and the next level down until you're down in the full text. Oh, thank you. It's these plain language descriptions make work more discoverable by people outside the field, and one of the things we've noticed a lot is that they contain words that are not in the original work because they are lay language, and academics will not use that language when they want to be explaining things to their colleagues, but they'll use them in this context. So then there's a whole audience who might be searching for those kinds of words that they're then going to find this work who would not otherwise have found it, but they still might get some value from it, and they still might be part of its pathway to impact. We're not the only people encouraging simple explanations of research. Lots of exciting initiatives out there, from 3-minute thesis and Dance Your PhD. I kid you not, very good site. Tweet Your PhD. Even the Academic Book Week last week has a new service from Liverpool University Press encouraging people to tweet a summary of their book. That one's about John Murray and Byron. Acrimony ensues. So, to summarise then, we're in a world where there are many ways to share your work. you've got to make better use of those platforms as an author. It's not just about explaining your work in plain language, it's also about making sure that you get it out there into the right places. And authors are the hub of the network of people most likely to be interested in their work. And so if they're not active, we need to mobilise them to be active, because they are the people from whom that big ripple effect will come out, much more so than from us as publishers or funders or any other role that we might play. But we need to be able to join the dots between the activities that they might undertake to promote their work and the various measures that we're all interested in, authors and publishers and institutions. We need to be able to see what effect the sharing has on the metrics in order that we can become more efficient, because nobody's got the time to be scattergun and just trying everything. And that's what we're trying to do at Kudos. So if people explain and share their work in Kudos, we will map that on a time-based graph against the growth in metrics such as views and clicks and downloads of their work and citations and alt metrics, so that we can try and help people see where there's a correlation. Is it when you shared your work on Twitter that the stats started to jump up? Was it Facebook? Was it LinkedIn? Was it when you emailed it? Was it when you stuck it on ResearchGate? Which of those things is actually driving the readership of your work? We're trying to join the dots there. And so I return to this slide again, really, that it is all about making it easy and showing people the value. We have to give authors not just guidance here, but actually a really simple way to do stuff, because they aren't marketing specialists, and effectively that is what we're asking them to do. It's not necessarily a skill set that everybody has, and yet we don't want research to become polarised into people who are good at marketing and people who are not. It's got to remain about the quality of the research. So we need to help the people, we need to level the playing field so that everybody has access to the same kinds of toolkits that they can use to get their work out there.
Well done. Congratulations.